Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up with Godzilla. This is my show where I have conversations with Godzilla fans about how they've grown with the character and franchise over time. We are halfway through season 3. I've had some familiar faces coming on and returning from prior seasons. I've had some new faces. And this person that I have on today, it's kind of an atrocity that I've not had this person on yet because I've known this person for quite possibly 20 years, I believe. They are a talented artist, talented writer, and I am so excited to pick her brain about the vision behind everything. So I would like to welcome the delightful Chris Graham. Hello, my dear.
Hey, how you going? Like here I am. I am taking over the stream. We're going to talk about cats. Nah, just kidding.
I would love to talk about cats. I mean, you could always get me talking about cats, but I also know that, like, I want you to take over the stream because I am just eager to nerd out about how obsessed with your work I've been over 20 years. Can you believe it's been 20 years since we've known each
Uh,
other?
Thank you. I now feel old. I think we met while you were still in high school,
I
and I
was.
was a 20-year-old. I was a 20-year-old working at a call center.
But you know what? We've aged like fine wine. We really
Yeah.
have. I'll never forget. My first exposure to you. I'm trying to remember which forum it was. Was it Kaiju File or was it a different one?
I think it was Rodan's Roost.
Yeah, yeah, so it was that one. I remember also encountering you on the Monster Zero forums. I never went there much because, ooh, it was kind of rough
Yeah, it
for a
was
time.
crazy. Yeah. It's funny. It's like I was there for like maybe a couple of months, and all of a sudden he made me an admin, and then he made me he made me a moderator, and then he made me into an admin, and I just like, what in the world happened? And people got jealous. They're like, why does she get to be an admin? She's only been here for like less than a year. It's like, because I'm the one who behaves.
It's because
By the
somebody
way,
needed to rein in that wild, wild west. That's why. And nobody
there
messed
you
with
go.
you, which was great. I loved that.
No, I asserted myself as like, y'all need to behave. Y'all need to behave. Like right now, okay? Y'all
And
need to behave.
I would argue, so being that you did know me when I was in high school, I felt that you taught me such valuable lessons when it comes to standing up for oneself because you probably witnessed periodically some of the BS that I had to deal with. And you
Yes.
were like, Donnie, what are you doing? Like, Donnie, Donnie,
Like,
get
what
your
are
shit
you doing?
together.
Basically, yeah, that sounds like me. Yeah, I mean, it's like I guess I am a very assertive and forceful kind of person. I am just blunt. I am as blunt as a baseball bat.
Oh,
And
I love it.
and I found out that my bluntness is how I survived on the internet. And it's like, this is how I can teach you how to survive. Be blunt.
Really, that's what I
Just
needed.
give them
That's
a
what
good
I needed
smack.
back then. Yeah, give him a good
Mhm.
smack, give him a good evisceration. Sometimes that's what you got to do. So, and we'll talk about this here a little bit more in a few minutes, but my first exposure to you was through not only your art, but also your fan fiction. I consider your fan fiction, CL Werner's fan fiction, Cindy's fan fiction as being like the formative fan fiction that inspired my trajectory to want to become a writer. So, we're gonna nerd out about that here in just a few minutes. So I'm pretty I'm pretty stoked.
I was like, it's like I inspire people. Come on.
Surprise! You do. You have. You still do.
Oh, I still do. Yay. At least I'm going
S-
to that is my one of my hopes is I'll leave a lasting impression on the internet.
Well, my dear, you have for a very long time, and it's going to continue doing so. So, the one thing that I'm really excited that I love about having people sit down with me and have these conversations is obviously we've all been brought together through Godzilla, right? This very
Yeah.
prolific, versatile character that many of us have fallen in love with when we were kids. Some people, fall in love with Godzilla later in life. It really just depends on an individual's entry point. But I really want to know how you were first introduced to Godzilla. So share your story on your entry point into becoming a Godzilla fan.
Well, first off, I have thought about that one particular question. First off, I'll talk about where I was born. I'm born in a city known as Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and we are famous for a very important thing, and it's called Little Boy. We were responsible for the creation of the uranium gun weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945.
Mm.
So my exposure to Godzilla was at first when I was a little kid back in the 80s. I am that old. I'm a Gen X, very late Gen X, but very, very much Gen X. Um, because of our connection with Hiroshima and therefore literally the idea of Godzilla, we had this huge blow up Godzilla at the American Museum of Science and Energy. And I was first introduced to Godzilla through that blow up Godzilla. And then I started watching his movies. Let's see, my very first Godzilla movie was Godzilla 1985 back in
Ooh.
1985. You know,
Ooh.
the Roger Corman version. So, with Raymond Burr, basically commenting on what was going on in Japan at the time because, that's how Roger Corman wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And, that's how I started getting attached and was like, "Oh, this is cool." And
Mhm.
I was, what, 7 years old when I started watching them?
Mhm.
So, way back when, back in the '80s, before the internet or the internet that we know of today, before
You
cell
know,
phones.
that's such an interesting first film. Like, you are probably the second or third person I've recently talked to who was like, Godzilla 1985 was my first Godzilla film. Because it's such a heavy film. Kind of scary when you think about it, too. So, like, you said you were like 7 years old. Like, in your 7-year-old mind at that time, like, how were you processing what you had watched? Like, was it just like, wow, like, huge dinosaur, rah, or was it just like, holy crap, this is scary? What were your reactions?
Well, I was just absolutely fascinated with it. I mean, I knew it was a guy in a suit, you know, and I knew it was a guy in a suit, my then stepfather, Jeff, he, was into film and photography, so I already knew this was special effects,
Hmm.
because I learned that from him, and but I was intrigued by the miniatures, I was intrigued by, how they were able to build an entire city on a set for him to romp through, and how everything was cut. In fact, a lot of people say that the 1985 version actually is the better cut version than the original.
Hmm.
It's like I found that rather interesting. I watched the original. I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see that this is the better cut film because it gets rid of some of the superfluous stuff that was
Hmm.
going on in the original film. So I was paying attention to that. I was wondering, like, how do they get the X1 to fly around like that? That is really
Hmm.
fascinating. And how are they doing the beam effects? I mean, it- that that was me. I was trying to figure out how did they did the technical stuff. When I was seven
Hmm.
years old. You know, so that
See,
really
I
got me
love
into God.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, if we focus more on as you branched into your teenage years, like, how did your love of Godzilla grow or shift in that time?
Well, during my teenage years, I kinda got into, let's say, Power Rangers a little bit. So I was already into the tokusatsu stuff
Hmm.
in my teenage years, and then I started getting into the Showa, uh, series because, well, unfortunately, was back in the 90s, and that's all we actually had access to. We didn't,
Yes.
I didn't have access to the Hesai stuff until like 1999.
Mhm.
So I watched a lot of the Showa stuff, and my favorite Godzilla movie that I started latching on to was Terror of Mechagodzilla. And
Mm.
I don't know what it was, but I really liked that movie. It's just like it just clicked with me or something like that.
That is a good
You know?
movie. Did you
Yeah, it
know,
is.
I don't know if you knew this, but next year is that film's ooh, what anniversary is that? Is that gonna be its 50th anniversary?
I
No.
wouldn't be no, 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 it was made like what, 1977? No, that's not
1975, I think. I think it's 1975. Is 1975 50 years ago?
I think so.
Oh my God. Well, worth the rewatch for the anniversary celebration, right? I've been giving myself
Yes.
so many aging existential crises over the past few weeks on this show because I've been like, oh my God, that's. Somebody mentioned yesterday that Godzilla vs. Megaguirus was released 25 years ago, or yeah, 25 years ago now, and I'm like, what is happening
Oh,
right
you
now?
don't need to remind me how old I'm getting. It's like,
Uh,
I'm in my 40s. I actually have gray hair now. It doesn't show up in the picture, but, I've got this streak, like, coming off my temple, and it's, like, becoming more and more shiny every
uh,
single year.
a
And then
wisdom
I'm getting
highlight.
another streak. Yeah, yeah, a wisdom highlight, and then here is another streak that's coming that's, like, on the crown of my head, and I'm like, "Oh, no. I'm getting
So
gray."
because I am nosy and just as you
Yeah.
continue to grow as a Godzilla fan, when did art and fan fiction become centerpieces for you?
Hmm. Fan fiction, art and fan fiction really well, I've been, doing art since I was 4 years old. So, it's been a long, long while, like, I guess 40 years now.
Hmm.
So, art has always been a staple for my creative outlet ever since I was a little girl. But fan fiction didn't really come around until about the 90s.
Hmm.
And I started reading these books by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman called Dragonlance,
Mm.
and I started kinda writing fan fiction about that, and that's how fan fiction became a thing. And then I wrote a crazy fan fiction about Godzilla, which sort of evolved over time, and actually, shared that once. The original fan fiction about Godzilla, you know before I got into the Kira stuff. And actually that fan fiction is just, again, it was mostly influenced by the 1985 movie.
I do love that about your work because I mean through a lot of your Godzilla fan fiction, like there is kind of like that darker um sci-fi tone that runs through most of it. And you mentioned your Kiru stories, which we'll talk about in a second, but like I really think that there was a certain point where you knew that you had something that was working well and that people were receiving it and excited and wanting more and you took off with it. Like you created like this pretty huge expanded universe of fan fiction
Yes. Yeah, it
that
is gigantic.
we
I
all
mean,
ate it up. We ate it up. I still eat it up.
silly enough. Yeah, it's like huge. It's like this is connected to this, it's connected to this. Oh, by the way, I have a reference here from this story, but it's like in a completely different universe. It's like, oh, by the way, oh yes, this character actually does exist. He's just in another universe from this character. But they're
Well,
basically
now,
all multiverse. It's like I
right,
was doing
right.
multiverse or Marvel was doing the multiverse in its cinematic universe thing.
Marvel took inspiration from you. Honestly, where's those royalties, damn it?
I know. It's like a multiverse thing. I was doing that before it was cool. Yeah, my hipster. I want to put my hipster glasses on. I was doing that before it was cool.
Oh, that's too funny. So let's talk about your Mechagodzilla series. So I'm gonna be completely blunt. I firmly believe that you took Mechagodzilla and made the character one of the most dynamic versions of that character that I think exists personally. And that it was after, I mean, it was inspired by the Kiru saga, right? The Kiru duology, because I mean,
Yeah.
your character is named after that character. So talk a little bit
Well,
about
thanks
your
for you.
vision.
Well, let's see here. I always had this sort of fascination about robots in general, but and AI. And it's funny about Kiru. I dated a guy once about 20 years ago, and he and I we actually went to see Pluto Nash.
Hmm.
And then after we saw Pluto Nash, we went out for a little walk in the park. And while we were walking, I was plugging this idea about this Godzilla fic I wanted to write. And he basically came up with the whole idea of the biosyntech. He came up with the idea of Kira being an AI, and I wanted Kira to be an actual character. I didn't want him just to be a machine.
Hmm.
That people use. I wanted him to interact with the characters and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And I drew inspiration from well, again, back in the 80s, I used to watch a program called Knight Rider.
Mm. I remember that all
And
too well.
yep, and this is where I got the idea of Kiru being an AI that you actually spoke to and you had a wit about him, was from Kit from Knight Rider. Well, actually, he
Mm.
was more like Car from Knight Rider rather than Kit. And I kind of imagined him to have either Peter Cullen's voice or Paul Free's voice. Unfortunately,
Mm.
Paul Free, he died, I think, back in 1987, but Peter Cullen's still around, you know.
Peter
So
Cullen's voice.
yeah, Peter Cullen's voice is really cool. So that if you ever wanted to know what Kiru actually sounded like, there it is. He sounds like Peter Cullen.
So it's fascinating to hear like those different points of inspiration, right? Because I feel like we don't really get opportunities to talk about those things. I'm
No.
going to be completely honest. One of the stories in your series that really kind of got the ball rolling for me was Mechagodzilla, was it 11, I think? It was titled Doppelganger.
Yes.
Uh,
That's
one of my favorite fanfics to this day. So good.
yes, absolutely. Doppelganger is basically when Kiro meets the Godzilla from Mecha Godzilla from Showa. And it's like, oh, Gordon Knight had the head. He had the head of the original Mecha Godzilla and based his technology off of it, but it was better.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, it's like I think I had fun with that one. My favorite line from Gordon Knight was, "Finders keepers, monkey weepers." I
Oh my
always
goodness.
remember that line. I've always have remembered that line.
Uh, so, of all of your stories that you've written, and then we'll talk about Curio's design here in just a second, of all of the fanfics that you've written in the Godzilla franchise, which one are you most proud of?
Honestly, I think the original because the original is the one that got everything got the whole ball rolling and everything like that.
Mm,
It started the whole thing. And then I just continued to went on and on and on and on, and now I thought about doing a crazy sort of crossover story in which Kiru and another character goes into the Star Trek universe, and hilarity ensues.
Oh my god, I would love that.
And I
Please make that
basically,
happen.
yeah, one of the I wrote a story with a guy that's based off of Mass Effect, and Kiru pretty much tells a character that his favorite character in Star Trek is Data, and it's one of the reasons
Mm.
why he owns cats now. And every
Oh,
single cat that he owns, he calls either Gordon or Gordina,
Gordina.
named after Gordon Knight.
I
And
love
basically,
that.
he says, it's like there's like something in my program that makes me want to call these cats Gordon.
See that okay, so this is another thing that I really appreciate about your fan fiction. Like there was always like this degree of like gravity and seriousness to everything, but you also found opportunities to incorporate this like tongue-in-cheek wit, which made the characters, especially Kiru, like very
Yeah.
enduring and easy to connect with, and very much a character to be invested in too. I love that.
I don't know what it is, but I have always been able to make characters relatable. It's just something that I never really understood how I was able to do it. I can make the most powerful character in the world relatable to people because I apply character flaws
Mm-hmm.
into characters, and they have foils, and they always have, other characters that will call them out for stuff. And another thing, I read a very famous author called Kurt Vonnegut,
Mm,
and I applied one of his rules to a lot of my characters: make them suffer, make them earn their happy ending.
mm-hmm.
So I make my characters suffer, and a lot of people are like, "Please don't do that." And I'm like, "No, it makes them more interesting if you
It
make them
humanizes
suffer."
them. So, talk a little bit about like Kiru's design because like you I mean, your stories really took off especially on the art front too because of the design that you created for your version of Kiru.
The design, well, I based it off of the well, Mechagodzilla 3 Kiru. That is primarily the entire thing, but everything else, well, I had this idea where, you know, he is primarily a cyborg. He's a little bit more than just a machine. He's a cyborg, and they used the regenerator G1 and Godzilla cells to literally make their own Godzilla.
Mm,
But they used the original Godzilla and not the current one. So they
mm-hmm.
used the bones and the stem cells and all that from the original Godzilla,
Yeah.
and of course they used the skeleton of the original Godzilla and put it inside of Kiru as well. But then I just thought it'd be kind of interesting if you actually removed his helmet, you removed his face stuff, there was in fact a living creature inside of that. And that's where I got the idea from. It's like, yeah. And also, well, I had trouble trying to draw the face bit of Kiru. So how I got around that was to give him an actual face. you know, so so then I just said, okay, let's just apply this to the story too. So yeah, he can actually remove his helmet, and underneath there's a Godzilla inside of that.
And you know what? That made the story super interesting too. So one like something that you did out of artistic convenience became a very fascinating aspect of the story and the character.
And one thing I've learned how to do is shortcuts.
What people don't realize is that, and I'm speaking from that because you know me, I'm not an artist, but from as a writer, that's kind of what you do. Like, the more seasoned you get at it, you learn how to make shortcuts, which make things better, but don't sabotage like the quality, right? And I try to especially get students to remember that like it's okay to take shortcuts. Like there's no shame in doing that so long as you're not compromising what you're doing, right? So, well, I am also eager to delve into what your favorites are these days. So, if looking back over the years, like you've been a Godzilla fan since you were in the single digits, which
Uh-huh.
films to this day would you say are your favorites and why?
Well, again, absolutely. Well, of course, after Godzilla X Godzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS, my favorites have been those two particular movies because I love Kiru. I love the whole idea of this, basically the resurrection of the original Godzilla to fight the current Godzilla. That is fascinating to me. So that's been one of my favorite movies, and of course, Terror Mechagodzilla. That's where I got the idea for Katsura being connected to Kiru. You know, I
Mm,
got influence off of that movie. So I found that rather interesting too. And the reason why I had Katsura connect to Kiru is to make Kiru more human. You know,
hmm.
yeah,
She kind of
because he
served
was
as like
so
his mirror, right?
yeah, yes, that's basically what she did.
Hmm.
So, cats are connected to Kira, made him more human, and I got that, off of Terra Mechagodzilla.
You know, that's kind of like a perfect segue. The next thing that I was going to ask you would be like, are there any particular kaiju or human characters you're drawn to? And if so, what draws you to those characters specifically?
Well, like I said, I always had a thing for robots, so Mechagodzilla especially. The reason is I have a bit of a mechanical side. You know,
Hmm.
I'm fascinated by science.
Hmm.
And so science and robotics and all that kind of stuff. So they they kind of bled into my stories and bled into my artwork. And I've been told by a lot of people that I draw really good mechanical things.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I would agree with that 100%. And you
Like
know,
I'm great at anatomy and I'm great with mechanical stuff.
and I'm glad that you bring this up because the science part of Godzilla, I feel like, is something that's not talked about enough. Because I'm going to be honest, a lot of the science, especially in like the Heisei era, really got me obsessed with like various things. Like I will never forget um Godzilla 1985 Return of Godzilla, like the geology component, Godzilla being drawn to the volcano to Mount Mahara. I got so hyper obsessed with geology and volcanology as a result of it. There were other instances like late Heisei era. I became very interested in like different forms of like radiation and how like nuclear reactors work because I was trying to understand like, well, why is Godzilla like either about to explode or melt down, I think that the science deserves to be celebrated a lot, and I'm glad that I am not the only one who is obsessed with that.
Well, we'll say this. When I saw that in Godzilla versus Destroy, and they said that, oh, Godzilla will melt through the core of the earth and destroy the earth that way, and I'm like, okay, no, that would never happen. That didn't happen with Chernobyl. The earth is really, really big, and also the earth is radioactive.
Mhm.
It actually is. It actually is. The mantle is very radioactive. It has thorium in it. It has uranium in it. It has potassium in it. That's radioactive. So basically, you know, Godzilla melting down and reaching the mantle, he's just he's just going to become a part of the mantle.
Mhm.
He's not going to destroy the earth. And I'm like, yes, I get what you guys are trying to do, and you're
Yeah.
referencing movie called The China Syndrome and all that kind of stuff, but that is not gonna happen, and, well,
Yeah.
like I said, I grew up in Oak Ridge. We we have a university that's dedicated to nuclear physics. So, yeah, yeah, it's like this that that the science of Godzilla versus Destroyer was just all wrong for me.
Yeah, it was so I when I initially watched it, I believed everything because I was just so excited about it. But then as I got older, I started kind of rewatching things and I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't know. I felt the explosion atmosphere scenario was a little bit more believable when it comes to the gravity of the situation.
Well,
But
actually, the explosion atmosphere thing was and the actual fear of what would happen if we detonated a nuclear weapon.
right.
And that was the original fear for that, and I'm like, "Well, it didn't happen when we first tested at Trinity, so I don't think it's going to happen now." Basically,
Right.
Godzilla is a giant reactor, and if anything else, he's just going to he's either going to explode and release an enormous amount of radiation and make things really, really poisonous for a while.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, and and of course now after events like Fukushima, we kind of know better now
Right.
about what actually happens.
Absolutely. I
And
think
of course, in Chernobyl, I mean, it's a
oh,
paradise. It's a little yeah, the creatures don't live for very long because they develop cancers, but it's green. It's very green.
mhm.
It's you can still visit it. You can actually go there. You know, it's
Yeah.
not as bad as we thought it was going to be.
It's
So,
all fear, right? I mean, I think that's
yeah,
what makes that's also why the Heisei era is kind of my favorite era because there were so many latent fears like during that Cold War time where people
yeah.
just didn't know. Like the science was like not there yet where we could fully understand like the impact, like the ecological impact on things. So like if we look at films like Godzilla versus Biollante, like where like there's like this very fascinating science about like cell mutation and then Destroya where like there's this debate on like what really would happen if this degree of a situation took place. Like there is a certain level of camp to it, like campiness to it.
Mhm.
But at that time, like it kind of felt very. I remember it feeling very larger than life, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like I wasn't behind on the science of Destroya, but I got the feeling of it, everything like that. And we were still learning some things too. My stepfather and my mother were one of the workers that were busy cleaning up the K-33 building, so they were learning how to dispose of nuclear waste.
Hmm.
That was back in the 90s.
Hmm.
So we were learning a lot of things about how to deal with, nuclear waste and where we were going to put it and how long it's going to last and all that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
Yep.
Wow. It's so unique to have like a family that has like that kind of experience and history too
Mhm.
with working with those materials.
Yeah, so that's one of the thing that fed into my connection with Godzilla is because, well, you know, I my parents, had to go into, decontamination showers and had to wear hazmat suits
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff, and it's probably one of the reasons why I got mad at Shin Godzilla because I actually knew where we were dumping our nuclear waste, and it wasn't the Mariana Trench.
Hmm.
Or that trench that they said it was near Japan. It's like, no, no, we weren't
Yeah.
dumping our stuff there. No, no, this actually could have been. all Japan's fault. They blamed it on the United States.
Mhm.
I did not like that movie. That's my least favorite Godzilla. I'd much rather watch Godzilla's Revenge than that movie.
That movie was definitely galvanizing for a lot of people, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So I have a pretty large question for you. And this
okay.
one's like one of the more philosophical questions that I really like to ask because I think it really helps us develop an understanding of each individual's unique, experience being a Godzilla fan. So, how has Godzilla shaped you into who you are today?
It made me appreciate, I guess, living here a lot more because, I have that connection. So I felt basically a deeper connection with Godzilla, and to me, putting on a Godzilla film just to relax is one of my fun things to do. I mean, it really, really made me, think about the necessary evil that my grandparents, did. They didn't know what they were building at the time when they were building it. And in fact, my grandmother, she only got the word atom from a
Mhm.
dictionary that her supervisor was showing her. It's like, yeah, there's something to do with atom, and that's what you're doing.
Mhm.
So they didn't know until the bomb was dropped. It puts in perspective for me. It's like, well, this is how this country is dealing with something that my own family had a hand in. So
Mhm.
it puts in perspective of that. But at the same time, it was a necessary evil. They were
Mhm.
backing a horrible, horrible man. And they attacked Pearl Harbor and didn't let us know about it until it was too late. To me, it makes the world grayer instead of black and white.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
always shaped living in a world of gray is always shaped by writing and is shaped uh, giving me this perspective to create complex characters that yeah you could root for, but still they have done some some pretty bad things, but they've also done some good things, and
Mhm.
because they're complex characters. So that's what Godzilla films have done for me.
Being human is inherently complex, right?
Yep.
And I think that's why we do the media we do because it's an exploration of all of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
The world is very complex, so and Godzilla has made me realize that. I for one thing, I get I was told by my grandmother many many times this was necessary, but at the same time, I'm watching these Godzilla films and seeing how they reacted to to the atrocity.
Mhm.
It and actually, well, to tell you the truth, those two bombs weren't they did make a huge impact, but our firebombing actually killed a lot more.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, like the firebombing of Tokyo, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
we did more damage by firebombing, and then the 2 bombs were basically more or less an affront to, "Hey, this is what we can actually do to you." You know,
Mhm.
we can make an entire city erase. That was always my view on the whole situation, but
Mhm.
it is all shades of gray. It is all shades of
Right.
gray.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the impact has been felt extensively,
Yeah.
and I think that's what makes Godzilla so enriching too, is because like those of us like myself who are so far removed from any of that reality, like being able to watch these stories and see kind of like that historic trauma in this particular character, like
Mhm,
it's so eye-opening, right? And it does help us see another side of a perspective that maybe we are insulated from wherever we may be, right? So no, I
mhm.
think that's an interesting perspective. I
Yeah,
do have a lighthearted question. I do have a
okay,
lighthearted question for you. How
okay.
far does your love of collecting go? Do you collect any Godzilla stuff?
I do have some Godzilla stuff. A friend of mine has been very, very gracious. You know, he loves my Kiru so much. He basically got me a bunch of Kiru toys. So I have a bunch of these Kiru figures, and I tell you one thing: the Kiru figures have helped a lot in my drawing of Kiru
Mhm.
because I use them as models. You know, to help me draw Kiru a lot better than I have been. And it is, you know, it's just so nice that I have fans that are willing to give me stuff, and of course my very first Godzilla figure was a GMK figure from Bandai. It was
Ooh.
Godzilla from GMK. Yeah.
Oh, I do love that version of Godzilla too.
Mhm.
So
I love
malevolent.
that version. I That version actually was a fun Godzilla. You could tell that the suit actor was having a lot of fun and
Oh,
that the
yeah.
animatronics guys were having a lot of fun because Godzilla was smiling in that one, and he was just so vicious. It's just so evil, you know, oh my goodness, it was just you know, he was basically the Joker the entire time. It was just delectable.
I know,
I
like,
really loved it.
I don't think we really ever saw that much dynamicness from Godzilla's character before, so that's another reason why I just really appreciate GMK, and I think why GMK very much withstands the test of time a bit, you know?
Yeah, and I love Kaneko's work. I mean, you know, he spiced up Gamera for me. I was never really that much of a Gamera fan,
Mhm.
but
Same.
when I saw Heisei Gamera, it's like, okay, this is awesome now.
Speaking
This
of
is this,
Kaneko, they just all so there's another Godzilla convention or a monster
yeah.
convention called All Monsters Attack, and they just announced that Kaneko is going to be one of their guests in May.
Ooh.
Oh, I was like, okay, like rolling out the big guests. I love seeing that.
Yeah, so I now I've actually met him. I was at a Godzilla convention and Kaneko actually decided to show up, and it was focused mostly on Gamera. So they had the original director for Gamera,
Hmm.
for Showa Gamera, with whom I actually met, and then they had Kaneko there too, and Kaneko was just wanting to visit, and that was
Hmm.
it. He's like, "Here I am." It's like, "Oh my God, there's Kaneko. I gotta
Uh,
go over there and say hi."
I would have been so Twitter pated, so Twitter pated.
This was G Fest 10. This was back in 2004, so it was like literally 20 years ago.
Do you ever envision venturing back to G Fest at some point?
Yeah, I have thought about it a couple of times. I've been kind of hung up on funds lately, you know, because you know I've had to deal with a lot of family issues, and uh, also everything's getting expensive now.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that
I
was
just
my
say that
issue.
because it would be so fun to meet you in person at some point.
Yeah,
We would cause mayhem.
yes, we would be pranking everybody. Yeah, it's just and then we go out for drinks and get a little drunk.
Oh, that would be
Actually,
great.
with
Sign me
that,
up.
I met Armand Backer in 2004, and he and
Oh.
we we had a lot of drinks that year too. And of course, as usual, I had my bathing suit with me, so I went swimming while the convention was happening. I just like, I need to go swimming one day, so I went swimming. You
That's
know,
amazing.
I love swimming. I'm basically, well, fish. I'm pretty much a fish. You know, I dive into that ancestry pretty well. You know, distant Devonian ancestor, but still.
That is so funny. So, Chris, this has been such a fun conversation. I do have one final question for you, though. So, what advice do you have for Godzilla fans who may be new to the franchise? It's kind of a two-part question. And do you have any advice for aspiring artists or writers?
Well, well, for anybody who's new to the franchise, my mother is actually new to the franchise. She started connecting a lot with the legendary Godzilla. She is a fan of the legendary Godzilla. Before, she wasn't a fan of Godzilla. And I try to get her to watch the original Godzilla. So she has actually watched at least the original Godzilla with Raymond Burr in it. So my suggestion is always start with the original, you know,
Hmm.
get the context of where this idea came from and the history behind it, the context behind this movie, because that particular movie has a lot of context,
Mm.
behind it. This is post-war Japan that's dealing with this monster. And I actually found out it's like Godzilla Raids Again was actually a Cold War film. It was
Mm.
basically Godzilla and Anguillus were representing the United States and the Soviet Union, and Japan was basically in the middle. I
Hmm.
thought that was actually kind of cute.
That's
But yeah,
interesting when you think about it.
yeah, yeah, it is. Godzilla represented the United States, of course, and Anguillus was representing the Soviet Union, and
Uh,
Japan was basically stuck in the middle. Yeah. But
uh,
Japan was being very positive at that time because
mhm.
everything was looking brighter despite the fact that this possibility of World War III was about to happen.
I recently just watched the Japanese version of Return of Godzilla. So I watched that for the first time and of course got that very layered level of political context that's not necessarily in 85. And I was just like
Mhm,
looking at from Raids Again, which did have like that like slightly optimistic component to the Return of Godzilla. Like it's such a drastic contrast between the decades with how Japan was perceiving the world power situation at the time. So, no, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I feel like that's an interpretation of Godzilla. I'm going to be blunt. Godzilla Raids Again is one of my most skippable Godzilla movies. But when I do revisit it, I love kind of examining like that socio-political context just a little bit because I'm a
mhm.
nerd, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's basically what I did with that movie too. It's like, this kinda reminds me of something. It was the Cold War, and I and that's what I suggest to, a lot of new Godzilla fans. Like, these movies were made in certain times when Japan was dealing with certain aspects of history.
Mm,
And that's how I got into Godzilla, was that particular context. And definitely, with Godzilla 1985 as my first one, well, I was living in a city that created the very first atomic bomb. And I'm having to live in cold world United States with the possibility of World War III breaking out and my city being nuked. So
mhm.
that was always a fear. That was like always up in front.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting.
yep.
So what advice do you have for the artists or writers who are aspiring and wanting to do stuff?
Well, here's one little advice that I have for at least the artists. I've been trying to draw Godzilla for a very, very long time. I can draw Mecha Godzilla fine. Apparently, everybody loved how I drew Titanosaurus. For the Mecha Godzilla Abyss story. Um, so I mean, I can draw a lot of the Toho monsters fine, and of course, I can draw King Ghidorah like there's no tomorrow because he's a dragon, and I love drawing dragons. Um, but I could never get Godzilla to look right, and a lot of people just kept on telling me, it's like, you just can't draw Godzilla very well." Well, in about 2005, 2006, 2016, 2017, around that area, I actually drew my own version of Godzilla. It was kinda a little bit based off of the legendary Godzilla, but I gave him, like, counter shading and some stripes, and I just made my own version of him, and all of a sudden, he blew up everywhere. Everybody wanted to look at this thing and fave it, and he wanted me to talk about it, and I created this little cute little comic, you know, still of the Heat team from, Godzilla the series, and with
Mm.
this Godzilla, standing with them, it and everybody just loved this particular Godzilla. So, my suggestion is don't try draw your own Godzilla, you know, look at how he's supposed to look, get the profile and everything like that, but, make something up, you know? That's actually how it worked for me. What really worked for me to do a lot of the Godzilla stuff was I made up my own thing.
And
And
sometimes that's what you gotta do.
yeah,
Yeah.
just make up your own thing. Keep it recognizable, but add your own flair to it.
You
And that's
know,
what I did.
I think that's the perfect advice to close out on, because I think that that's rare advice for artists to receive, but beneficial nonetheless.
Yeah.
So, Chris, this has been such a wonderful conversation. A conversation that's been years in the making. So
We need
thank
to we
you.
need to do this again.
I would love that. Well, I'm planning next season, so I will have a seat for you ready to go.
All
Um,
right.
so where can people find your stuff? Plug away.
Well, let's see here. I'm on ArtStation. Uh, my thing is Ghostwalker 2061. Ghostwalker is all one word, and then the 2061 is the year of Halley's Comet. So that's
Mhm.
how you can remember that.
I never knew that. See, you learn new
Yeah.
things. Ever
Yes,
love that.
2061 is the year of Halley's Comet. I saw Halley's Comet in 1986, and so I have a thing for Halley's Comet in 2061. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see it, but I know it's coming.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we will get there. We will get there. And I'm on an art station under that. Of course, you can always look me under Christine Graham under art station. And of course, I have a Deviant art page that I still post, but not as regularly. And that's also Ghostwalker 2061 on Deviant Art. And of course, I have an Instagram that is, at Kadzul. And I primarily have been posting like just things I've been finding on Instagram. I'll just repost them. And it's like, maybe I'll find something interesting that I posted. And of course, I've been posting some of my art there too.
So, my friends, I will have links to all of those down in the description section of the video. Chris, thank you again for dealing with my mayhem and my chaos. It's always it means a lot to me.
No problem.
So, my friends, do not forget that Growing Up with Godzilla premieres on the first and third Sunday of every month at 4 p.m. Thereabouts, if I have my shit together. Beyond that, don't forget to keep standing tall. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.